Hello, everybody. This is Howie Hawkins, the Green Party candidate for president. We hope Angela Walker will join us, my vice presidential running mate. They're keeping her late on the job again. So we'll see how that works. And we're looking forward to having Greg Palast on to talk about voter suppression and election protection later on. He's got a short broadcast he's got to do in another place, and then he'll come on. So I'm right now in Chicago. In the last week, I've been to Nashville, Tennessee, Denver, Colorado, Cheyenne, Wyoming, Indianapolis and Muncie, Indiana, Springfield, and Chicago, Illinois. And tomorrow I finally head back to New York. And I've been in a third-party debate, have done meets and greets and press and videos with Greens in these different places I've visited. And so, we're working as hard as we can. We're trying to get 7 million phone calls done to likely voters for us by the election. And we need your help with that. You can volunteer on the website. We also are paying folks to do that. It's tedious work. So you can donate to the campaign at howiehawkins.us so we can get more of those calls out, because, really in the end, that's how you get votes. You talk to people, get them to commit, and then get them to the polls. And that's core to getting as many votes as we can so we can at least secure ballot lines for the next election cycle. We're also starting a legal fund to fight to make sure the vote is counted. This is something that is now a Green tradition. We did it in 2004 in Ohio. We did it in 2016 in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And we're probably going to have to do it this time because Trump has shown his cards and the Republicans are going to try to steal another election. So we're going to intervene even if the Democrats won't. And that's been the tradition. In 2004, Kerry backed down, Gore backed down in 2000, and Clinton backed down in 2016. And, you got to ask yourself, why? Are they more concerned to make the system look legitimate even though they had their election stolen from them? I mean, what's their problem? So we will carry that Green tradition forward. And then on election night, we're going to have a live stream like we are now. That's next Tuesday, but it's going to be much longer. We're going to be on. We're going to give you the reports you won't get from the corporate media, because we're going to be talking to the Green candidates around the country. We've got a lot of great candidates. We're going to get reports in from them. We're going to talk about what's next for the Green Party. And we'll talk about election protection. It'll be the place to be on election night. And the details for that will be posted on our social media shortly. So we just had a Supreme Court decision, which just shows how damn hypocritical these Republican justices are. This decision yesterday quashed a federal district court decision to extend by 6 days the time in which ballots in Wisconsin, absentee ballots that are postmarked by Election Day, can be received by boards of election to be counted. And the Supreme Court quashed that because the Republicans don't want people voting because they think that increases their chances. But these hypocritical Republicans on the Supreme Court made the opposite decision last spring when the Republicans wanted that. Remember that April primary where people were standing in line? They didn't have enough polling places, like 2 out of 96 places in Milwaukee, because the Republicans thought they could get one of their Supreme Court justices reelected. And actually, the people came out and rejected that. But in that case, it went to the Supreme Court, and those Republicans said, yeah, the time to receive absentee ballots can be extended. So they contradict themselves. And what it tells you is that we have our elections administered in this country by the parties that govern the country. They're administering their own elections. And we've experienced that in our ballot access fights. These are strictly partisan hacks on the election boards, on the election commissions, in the courts. Republicans vote to put us on, Democrats vote to put us off. And they're both kind of off the mark because most of our voters wouldn't vote for either of them if we're not on the ballot. So they overestimate our impact on their fight with each other. In any case, it's really ironic for us because we just went through the courts in Wisconsin. And while we know the Republicans doing massive voter suppression, and Greg Palast is going to talk about that. The Democrats practice voter suppression by party suppression. They try to suppress the Green Party. And in Wisconsin, as the dissenting opinions, when our case finally got to the Supreme Court, noted, the facts and the law were on our side. And they should have, in fact, the Democrats on the election commission who were presiding over the hearing didn't let us present our documentation, broke the law. But that didn't matter. The facts and the law don't matter to these people. They vote along partisan lines. They just hacks for their parties. And so what we need, and this should be part of our democracy reform agenda, is an independent agency to administer elections. It's nonpartisan civil service. That's what every other electoral democracy in the world has. Well, we got our own governing parties presiding over their own elections. They gerrymandered districts. They allowed corporate money, and particularly dark money, we don't know where it's coming from, by the politicians. I mean, as one of Greg Palast's books was titled, it was titled The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. The subtitle is A Tale of Billionaires and Ballot Bandits. And that's what we got. So, you know, when Greg Palast comes on, he's been following this since the stolen election of 2000. He's followed it in 2004 and in 2020. And he's got a wealth of knowledge, and we're looking forward to that discussion. Another thing happened today was the Amy Coney Barrett got confirmed. And here again, the hypocrisy of the Republicans is breathtaking. Because when Obama appointed somebody 8 months before the election, oh, we got to wait for the election. And here we are. This woman, you know, gets her hearing less than a month before the election. We haven't even had the election. She already been rammed through and put on the Supreme Court. And of course, Trump is, you know, really concerned about that because he wants justices there to hand him the election if he can somehow get it to the Supreme Court like Bush did in 2000. So, you know, people say, well, what are we going to do about the Supreme Court? There's a lot the Congress could do. They could pass a law for term limits, make it 18 years. So every 2 years with 9 justices, one of them rotates off. So every president gets to make 1 or 2 appointments instead of, you know, the luck of the draw of who dies. And, you know, Trump got lucky. Obama didn't so much. And then they denied one of his appointments and then took another. You know, when Lincoln had an opportunity to appoint somebody a month before the election, he said, this is during the Civil War. He said, let's wait, see who gets elected, you know, in the Congress and the president. So it's just breathtaking. So what can we do? Term limits. There's a clause, it's called the Exceptions Clause of the Constitution, which gives Congress the right to limit jurisdiction. They can rotate justices on and off the Supreme Court and other federal courts like the appeals courts. That's something Bernie Sanders was talking about. I think that's something worth looking at. You could require a supermajority for cases that concern rights as opposed to, you know, disputing, you know, corporate issues or government regulation issues, which is a lot of what the court does. There's a lot of things we can do because this Supreme Court's become like a super legislative council that, you know, is got more power than it should. It's overwhelming Congress along with the executive branch. So that's why we need to start electing Greens to Congress to assert the power of the people's branch. It's the first branch in the Constitution, and the House is the first house in the Article 1 for a reason. You know, that's the foundation of our democracy. So those are some of the things that are on my mind. And Angela's not here yet, so maybe we can take some questions while we wait for Greg Palast. Klaus C., do you agree with many of Bernie's policies ideas? Yeah, his policies are going in the right direction, particularly on domestic policy. Medicare for all is a signature issue. We want to go further and have a national health service, not just national health insurance. We got a long paper on our website about Medicare for all as a community-controlled national health service. But Bernie was popular because that's been a popular idea since Truman. They called it national health insurance in those days. That's had majority polling ever since. And I think what Bernie did was capture, the public support for that. And that's why he was such a strong candidate for president in the Democratic primaries. He also had the only serious Green New Deal proposal from any of the Democrats. And I dissected these in an article Against the Current in the fall of 2019. We go a little faster than Bernie. His program was 16.3 trillion over 10 years to reduce to zero carbon emissions in the energy and transportation sectors, which gets us, that's about a little over half of the carbon emissions. But he takes until 2050 to get the manufacturing, agriculture, and building sectors zeroed out for greenhouse gas emissions. Our plan is to get there by 2030. Our plan is 27.5 trillion over 10 years. And we show our homework. You can look industry by industry, service by service, and figure out or look at how we got our cost number and how many jobs it would create. Bernie's proposal kind of presented the conclusions, but it looked to us like, they didn't show their homework, but they probably got it pretty right because they were on a little bit slower timetable. In any case, that was a pretty serious proposal compared to Joe Biden, which had the worst one, his Green New Deal, which he doesn't use that term anymore. He made that clear if anybody wasn't paying attention in the first debate. It was basically some incentives for solar energy production while we do all the above energy policy, which was the policy under Obama and Biden. And we fracked the hell out of the country, became the world's #1 oil and gas producer. And while they don't put it so bluntly in the Democratic platform, which is Biden's platform, that's basically what they plan to do. You can sort of see it when they talk about carbon capture and sequestration, which isn't going to happen because it's too expensive and we price gas out of the market. But that's telling the oil industry that, and the gas industry particularly, we got your back. And they refuse to ban fracking, which means they're going to frack for gas. They're going to build a lot of pipelines. They're going to build a lot of gas-fired power plants. And then they're going to say, well, carbon capture and sequestration, we can't afford it. And so the planet's going to cook, and we're in big trouble. And then they don't give many real numbers. One of the numbers they give is, well, we're going to retrofit 5 million buildings in 4 years. Yeah, well, great. There are 120 million buildings in the country. And at that rate, it'll take 150 years to clean up the building sector for energy efficiency and clean power. We don't have 150 years. We're in the middle of an existential crisis, and we're acting too late as it is. As Greta Thunberg pointed out to the UN, and her childlike, getting to the nub of the issue is, childlike's not the right word, it's intelligence. She told them, look, your last report, the International Panel on Climate Change, about the 1.5 degrees Celsius rise in temperatures, which is a threshold beyond which it gets very dangerous. We have a global carbon budget of 620 gigatons carbon. And in the last 2 years, we've released 42 gigatons carbon, which means we've ate through 20% of that budget. And at the rate we're going to blow through it in 8 years. And nothing's happening. Biden calls climate change, Trump calls climate change a hoax, but the Biden plan acts as if it's a hoax. So Bernie had a good Green New Deal program. Tuition-free public college. We had that in New York City at the City University of New York from 1848 till 1976. Why are we going backwards as the country gets richer? And it's because the billionaire class that Bernie was talking about is getting more powerful. And, my big beef with Bernie is he says he's a socialist, but he's really a New Deal Democrat because he wants to tax the billionaire class, but not democratize and socialize the big banks and corporations, which is the core of the billionaires class wealth. And as long as they have that concentrated economic power, it translates into concentrated political power. And they can resist the social programs like Medicare for All and a Green New Deal and roll them back. So we got to go beyond Bernie. But yeah, Bernie was the best among the Democrats. It's just, I think his big mistake was he got elected as an independent to the mayor of Burlington, then many times to Congress, then twice to the U.S. Senate. Then he tried to run as a Democrat, and the Democrats weren't having it. The establishment closed ranks against him, and he lost. So I think the lesson of Bernie Sanders is progressives and socialists got to run independent of the two-party duopoly, the two-party corporate state, and take their message right to the voters right through the general election. And we can win. The Greens have elected, oh, I got another question. Am I going on too long? I just want to finish with this point. The Greens have elected over 1,200 people over the years. We have over 100 elected officials right now. We can replicate that into the thousands and build a political base in local government, and from there, state legislatures and Congress. Build from the bottom up. And it's not rocket science. You go out, you talk to the voters, you tell them what you're talking about. You know, my platform, according to public opinion polls, is more popular than Biden and Trump. We're for Medicare for all, they're not. We're for a Green New Deal, they're not. We're for ending the endless wars, they're not. If the corporate media had covered me, if I'd been in those debates, I might be leading in the polls right now. But that's not going to happen until we build such a strong political base, including the caucus in Congress, so they can't ignore us. So I think that's the way forward. And I think Bernie, I think, has shown us, even though he didn't intend to, was we should be running independently of the two-party corporate state. So Z Manny asks, what will change? What needs to change so that more Greens will be running in the future, and how to change this? Okay, well, my next point in the last question was getting at this point. What needs to change is that Greens need to learn how to run local campaigns. Some know how to do it. It's really about voter contact. You can have the greatest signs, the greatest leaflets, the greatest platform, even get good media coverage if you know how to do press work and build relationships with local media. That's important. But in the end, you got to have voter contact. The voters got to feel like you know them and they have a relationship to you and they trust you. And that only comes from voter contact. And that's where I think some Greens are weak. That's what's got to change. We got to learn how to not just stand for election and say we're on the ballot and, you know, hope for the best. You really got to systematically go through whatever district you're in and identify the people that are likely to vote for you if you talk to them, and then go talk to them. Keep a list of those voters. I like to use a 3-point system. 1, they're with you. 2, you couldn't tell. They want more information. They're thinking about it. 3, they're with the other guy. And then you make sure those 1s votes and you work on those 2s to win them over. And then on election day, really the last 4 days, starting on that Saturday before election, you start calling your 1s and tell them about the election, how important it is to vote. And then on election day, you have poll workers in the polls who observe who on the list in that precinct or election district has come out to vote among your supporters. And you cross them off the list. Then you got a list of people who haven't voted yet. And then about mid-afternoon, you start calling them. Do they need a ride? Do they need someone to watch the kids while they drive to the polls? Are they're watching the football game or whatever, and they need a little extra boost to get off their bottom and get to the polls? I mean, you do what you can and you drag them to the polls. And that's how you win elections. And I think if we're serious, that's what we got to do. And like I said, I believe we can elect thousands, because these local races, I mean, just taking my city of Syracuse, the Democrats don't know how to run campaigns, because once the machine designates somebody for office, it's automatic. I mean, my city's half people of color. The white people are traditional Democrats, most of them now. The Republicans don't have a chance. They're the third party in my city. We had a good guy, he's a retired firefighter. Somehow he got designated to be a city councilor, and then he started to do some things that the mayor didn't like, and they pushed him out. And he wanted to get back in. He came to us, and when he came to us, he said, you know, I don't really know how to run elections, because it was kind of automatic, so we had to show him. And he didn't win. He did respectably. And it was 2 open seats for an at-large, and there's like 7 candidates. He came in, I think, 3rd or 4th, over 25% of the vote. If he'd have done it like he was a Democrat, just sat back assuming he'd be elected, you know, he would have got much less. So that's what needs to change within the Green Party. We need to learn, you know, these basic things about how to run local elections, and we can win them. We really should be winning a lot. We have a good record when we run. I think it's like 1/3 of the people we've run over the years have actually been elected. And there are a lot of local seats that really they aren't contested, or they aren't contested seriously. In the rural areas, mostly Republican, the Democrats don't try. In the urban areas, the inner cities anyway, it's mostly, the Democrats got control and the Republicans don't run seriously. So we can be the second party right away everywhere. And once you get into debate, that's half the battle, because when people hear about our platform and how it works, it's popular. Even with people that self-identify as moderate or conservative, some, liberal, once you get below that and talk about concrete solutions to real problems and talk to people one-on-one, those labels go away, and then they're looking at you like somebody who's got a serious plan, and it makes sense. That's how we're going to win these elections. And that's our next step. That's how we're going to build this party into a major party in force. Rick Sourmilk. Can you speak on the need to defund the military to attain the Green New Deal? Well, we've always called for big cuts in military spending to help fund the Green New Deal. But it's more than that. It's allocating resources. I mean, we can always find the money. The Fed can print money, spend it into the economy through the federal budget, and we can pay for these things up front that way. Federal law requires you sell treasuries to cover any deficit that isn't covered by tax revenues. So people say, oh, the debt, but that debt on the public side is an asset on the private side. Those treasuries are investments in our pensions or just our personal savings. And, a lot of people would not be happy if they didn't have that opportunity to, have those safe investments. So that's not the issue. The question is, how do you balance what is needed in the economy? How do we employ fully people and our capital? And how much money do we need to put in the economy to make that happen? And once there's full employment, then you got to, not keep the money flowing, because then you risk inflation. But we're far from that. So the Green New Deal, the money's not the object. In relation to the military, we have all these engineers and factories and all these resources. It's the real resources, not the monetary expression. It's being wasted on militarism. And we need to put that into converting our economy to zero to negative greenhouse gas emissions and 100% clean power to save ourselves from this climate catastrophe that we're facing. So, we want to defund the military because the military is doing a lot of things that we don't need. They're not protecting us in our peace and security. They're protecting the profits of US-based global banks and corporations, and stealing or exploiting cheap labor under repressive governments abroad that we support, stealing natural resources, imposing debt through, the banks and the International Monetary Fund, and then forcing them to pay that back by imposing austerity, cutting health and education and basic public services, or privatizing them so that these corporate vultures can grab those assets too. That military is not about defending us. It's about defending our 1%. So that's another reason to cut the military budget. We need a defense to defend our own territory, but we can do that with a fraction of what we're spending right now. So that's the relationship between the military budget and the Green New Deal. Stephen Laeli Jr., hope I pronounced that right. Since Biden wouldn't elaborate, what is the difference between the Green Plan and Biden Care, and what makes it a better plan? Well, Biden Care is public subsidies for private insurance with an option to buy Medicare coverage if you can get that. The motivation would be it's cheaper than what you can get from the private insurance companies. And that system costs more than Medicare for all. I mean, I was so frustrated when all the other Democrats beside Warren and Sanders were saying, we can't afford Medicare for all. When the Affordable Care Act, even with the public option, was much more expensive. It's something like $30 billion for Medicare for all and $35 billion or trillion over 10 years for the subsidized private insurance with a public option for Medicare. So We want to have socialized payment. That's national health insurance, a single public payer. And that's very efficient. Right now, about 30% of the healthcare dollar goes into administrative overhead because a patient goes to a provider and the provider has to first figure out what your insurance plan is, then whether the treatment they're prescribing or want to do is covered. And if it is, what can they charge? What will the insurance company pay? And then they bill the insurance company, and often the insurance company says we're not paying, and then they fight over that. You got whole armies of people pushing papers over that nonsense. With a single public payer, there's one price list, and it's paid by that single public payer for the various medically necessary services that are covered. But we want to go beyond that and socialize not just the payment, but the delivery. So our hospitals are public, our clinics are public, our doctors and nurses are public civil servants on a salary instead of fee for service, which is what we got with these private hospital organizations, even some nonprofit and even some public, competing with each other for customers and for revenue. So they want to maximize the fees, which means running patients through faster than they should be, and maybe adding a test here and a treatment there that aren't really necessary so they can get more fees. So it becomes a cost control issue as well as a patient care issue. So we want public delivery under democratic control. So we would have publicly elected health boards administering health care delivery in their local district. And then they'd federate at the state and national level for overall planning and coordination. So we think that's a much superior plan than certainly the private insurance subsidized by the government, which is the Affordable Care Act, or what they call Obamacare. And it's better than national health insurance, or what we call Medicare for All, as proposed by Bernie Sanders and Representative J. Paul. We used to call that in the 70s when we had three options. We had a national health service, that was the Dellums bill. We had national health insurance, that was the Kennedy bill. And then we had the Nixon plan, which was public subsidies for private insurance and mandates for people to buy insurance through their employer or individually, or for employers to provide it. And so we used to call the national health insurance the Great Leap Sideways, because while you socialize payment, you're creating a public trough at which the private insurance and healthcare delivery organizations and the drug companies could feed. And you have a cost control problem, as well as an accountability problem, because there's no provision for elected boards at the local level to oversee the delivery in a local area. So that's, I forget the original question. Difference between our plan and Biden's plan. Yeah, Biden's plan is capitalist medicine with more subsidies. And because it's such an ineffective system, they'll give you an option to buy into Medicare. I'm on Medicare. You got to pay premiums. You get deductibles. It's not the Medicare for All system that is being talked about. We call it improved Medicare for All. So you don't have out-of-pocket or any expenses at the point of healthcare delivery. It's publicly funded through a progressive tax system. Hey, Greg Powers, it's great to see you.
Okay.
And,
can you see me and can you hear me?
I see you and I hear you.
Okay.
And what I'd like to do is introduce you and have you tell people what's been going on with voter suppression, purging the voter rolls. I know a lot of people know something about it, but you've been studying this since the stolen election of 2000. So, educate our folks and then talk about what we can do to protect the election. So for people that don't know Greg Powers, they should. He's been documenting how elections have been stolen since Florida, 2000. And of course, Greens know all about that because they blame us. But there were thousands of black voters who didn't get to vote, or votes weren't counted in Florida. And Greg was one of the first people to document that. He had a book called The Best Democracy That Money Can Buy, A Tale of Billionaires, and Beltway bandits. And there's a chapter in there about Florida. And then he talked about 2004, where, the Greens tried to, get all the ballots counted in Ohio. And that book is called Armed Madhouse. And then his latest one is how Trump stole 2020, which is to get us to read the book. We don't want that to happen. So, and just, the Greens' interest in this is, of course, we want election integrity for the real winner that people vote for to win, which from the polls isn't likely to be us. But what we got at stake in this election is whether or not we have a ballot line in 40 or more states depends on the vote we get for president. So we want all those votes counted as well. And my running mate just got off work. So that's Angela Walker. And Angela, I just introduced Greg Palast and asked him to tell us what's going on with voter suppression and what we can do about it. So the floor is yours, Greg.
Well, thank you very much, Howard. I should say, and I want to be very straight about it, I am nonpartisan. I'm a journalist, and I also run the Palast Investigative Fund, which is a not-for-profit, nonpartisan foundation. And as a journalist, I don't choose candidates or tell you who to vote for. But I do appreciate this opportunity, as I do with any elected official or those running for office, to talk about how to protect your vote, no matter who you vote for. And while I have a book out called How Trump Stole 2020, I'm not even telling you to vote against Trump. I'm just saying that the voters, not Jim Crow trickery, should decide this election. And I'm very concerned because today we had the Supreme Court say that Wisconsin could not extend its deadline for receiving mail-in ballots. Now, as you know, there's going to be a flood of mail-in ballots. And 60% of Democrats say they're going to vote by mail-in, and it's too much for the post office to handle. And we saw this in the spring primary when 80,000 votes were disqualified because they weren't received by election night. And that wasn't the fault of the voters. Now, why is this important? If it's going to be 80,000 in the primary, figure double that, triple that. You're going to have 250,000 votes in Wisconsin possibly lost because of this ruling of the Supreme Court. Overwhelmingly Democrats and overwhelmingly voters of color, who are the core of the Democratic Party in Wisconsin. And I bring this up because this is the tragedy of America. Our secret history of, the hidden history of America is that we don't count all the votes. And Jim Crow has switched from white sheets terrorizing African-American voters to spreadsheets carefully removing them from voter rolls or putting other impediments in the way. For example, when I talk about not counting the votes, and back in 2016, there's a story which you should, if you're in the Green Party especially, you should know. You should be proud of yourself for attempting to get votes counted. I'm not talking about whether your candidate Jill Stein should have won or not. But back in 2016, in Michigan, Trump shocked everyone by winning by 10,700 votes out of 5 million. Just spit. Now, however, Trump won by 10,700 votes officially, but that's not counting 75,355 ballots, which were never counted. 75,355 ballots in Michigan. How'd that happen? The answer is, in Detroit, 87 vote counting machines, that is the scanners, broke down. I mean, you vote on paper ballots, people think that that's a miracle. Well, no, but you count them on machines. And the ballots could not be read by 87 machines broke down because they're old and falling apart. Now, I got to tell you, so think about it a minute. Those ballots, had they been counted, would have given Hillary Clinton Michigan. And if you follow that same review procedure in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, we'd have President Hillary Clinton. Ironically, Hillary Clinton, it was the Green Party and Jill Stein that challenged the vote count in Michigan and put up the millions of dollars to have those votes counted. It's often called the recount, that supposedly the Green Party and Jill Stein were trying to recount the votes. That's not accurate. It's counting the votes that were never counted. Because you have to understand, when a machine breaks down, there is one machine that's really accurate, Howie. One machine that's accurate. It's called the human eyeball. And they can read those 75,300 ballots, 355 ballots, and they started to count those ballots paid for by the Green Party. And Hillary was going to win Michigan and its electoral votes. However, then Donald Trump went to court, suing the Green Party, suing the state to stop the vote count. Remember, it's not a recount. It was counting those 75,000 ballots. And again, it's overwhelmingly votes of African Americans and young people that were not counted. I was there in Michigan for Democracy Now. Now, then Donald Trump's lawyers went into court and said, Jill Stein can't have these ballots counted because you can count them 55 times and Jill Stein will not become president. She won't get Michigan's electoral votes. So only Hillary Clinton has standing. That is the legal term for the right to sue, the right to have those votes counted. And Hillary Clinton, luckily, Hillary Clinton's lawyers were in court. Jill Stein had put up the money. Hillary Clinton's lawyers were in court. So the judge turned to Hillary Clinton's lawyers, has been reported to me, and said, so how does Secretary Clinton feel? What does Secretary Clinton want to do? Does she want to count these votes or not? And their answer of Hillary Clinton's lawyers was, we're just here to observe, which I understand was her campaign slogan too. But the key thing is that it was the Green Party that tried to get those votes counted, even though they weren't Green Party votes. And it was blocked by the Democratic Party. So what I'd like to do, there's all this new Jim Crow trickery. In fact, I hope you get a chance, everyone, to go to gregpalast.com. If you don't pick up the book, you can pick up the book, How Trump Stole 2020, or you can get the audiobook free at gregpalast.com, or go to my site. Because one thing that we do have in the book is something called the ballot condom for safe voting. No, Howard, you don't slip it on the ballot, over your ballot. You do follow the 7 steps, including, by the way, don't go postal, don't mail in your vote, go into early voting, take it in, especially with this ruling from the Supreme Court, which will not only apply to Wisconsin, but any other state. If you haven't mailed in your vote now, 1 week before the election, don't dream of voting it, of mailing it in. You have to walk it in, if not to a polling station, to your county board of elections. So if you haven't voted by mail, unless you're in one of the left coast states where mail-in voting is the principal way of voting and it's fairly protected, that's California, Oregon, Washington, Utah, Colorado, Nevada, and Hawaii. If you're not in those states, for God's sake, don't go postal. Walk in that ballot. Even if you've got the ballot already in your hands because you've requested it, 22% of all mail-in ballots never get counted, 22%. And the chance of it not being counted is 300% higher if you're black than if you're white. 300% higher. And if you're young, that is, if you're under 24, the chance your ballot, mail-in ballot, will be disqualified on cockamamie grounds is 1,200% higher than if you are an older plus 65 voter. 1,200% higher to have young people's votes eliminated, Hispanic votes, African American votes, Asian American votes, about 300% more likely to have your vote thrown out. And it's not a small number. Last election, 2016, 5.8 million votes were cast and never counted. That's an official number from what we call the Elections Assistance Commission, and from Greg Palast. Now, so that's the spiel, and I appreciate your having me on to talk about the right to protect the vote, and whether you're Democrat, Republican, green, blue, purple, yellow, doesn't matter. I want you to be able to have your vote and have your vote counted. So follow those rules in the ballot condom for safe voting at gregpalast.com. Now, I got a couple questions for you, Howie, if you don't mind.
Sure.
For the candidate.
Go ahead.
Number one is what's on everyone's mind when they see your name on a ballot. What the hell are you doing running for president? I'm sure you get this question every time, but I have to ask it. After Ralph Nader was blamed for the loss of Al Gore in 2000, after Jill Stein was blamed for the election of Donald Trump in 2016, why in the world would you have your name on a ballot with the potential of being an election spoiler?
Because I know black voter suppression, first of all, made it close, and then the Electoral College elected the loser, Donald Trump, or before him, George Bush. And one reason to run, and we've been trying to give this to the Democrats since Nader ran, is a proven nonpartisan solution to the spoiler problem. And that is replace the Electoral College with a national popular vote using ranked choice voting. And ranked choice voting is gaining traction. We're going to do it in Maine in this presidential election. It's on the ballot in Massachusetts and Alaska. We got it in 23 cities and counties. So one reason is to advance that, to end the spoiler problem. And, you know, it wasn't the Green Party that suppressed the black vote. It wasn't the Green Party that imposed the Electoral College. And so it wasn't the Green Party that spoiled those elections. And then we got life or death issues. We got a climate meltdown. And we're the only party for a Green New Deal. We have declining life expectancies among working class people. And we have an economic bill of rights, including Medicare for all, to end poverty and economic insecurity. And then we got a new nuclear arms race. The bullets and the atomic scientists as their doomsday clock, the closest it's ever been to midnight. And both parties, both Trump and Biden, are committed to deploying new strategic and tactical nukes, which has kicked off this new nuclear arms race. So we have peace initiatives. We want to cut the military budget, bring the troops home from these endless wars, pledge no first use of nuclear weapons, and then go to the nuclear powers and say, we're no longer a threat to you. Let's negotiate complete and mutual nuclear disarmament. So there you got 3 life or death issues that are not being discussed. And I would submit that if I had been in those debates with Trump and Biden, if I had been covered by the national media, we'd be contenders in this election. Because I think in the public opinion polls show, majority of people are with us, not Trump and Biden on those questions.
Okay, but I hate to say it, but I think you're kind of squirreling out of the question, which is if you, look, officially George Bush won Florida by just 537 votes. Trump won, as I mentioned, Michigan, which, by the way, you tried to save for Hillary Clinton by having a count of the uncounted ballots. But, Trump won Michigan officially by 10,000 votes. Way less than the Green Party won in that election. So that's why Jill Stein was considered a spoiler, and Ralph Nader was considered a spoiler. The question is, are you campaigning in those battleground states, and do you have any fear that you're taking votes away from those who support your positions but think that Trump should be removed from office?
Well, we all think Trump should be removed from office. And most of our voters are people that wouldn't come out if we weren't on the ballot. Mm-hmm. They're disgusted with both parties. We know from the exit polls in 2016 that 61% of Jill Stein's voters would have stayed home if she wasn't on the ballot. Plug those numbers into Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. If she was not on the ballot, it wouldn't have made a difference. And then for us, these so-called swing states, well, first of all, the battleground states are moving. And it sort of moved from the upper Midwest to old Republican strongholds like Georgia and Texas and Arizona. So if I was to say, vote for Biden in the swing states, well, which states are those? But the bigger issue is, for us, every state's a battleground. Florida's contested right now. And we got Greens in Miami who are trying to get the sugarcane burning stopped because they burn the cane to make it easier to harvest when the wind is blowing toward the Black and Latino communities that suffer enormous health problems. They call it black snow. But when it's blowing east toward Miami and Mar-a-Lago, they don't burn the cane. And the Greens are fighting the Democrats as well as the Republicans on that because both those parties are pandering to the owners of the sugarcane industry.
Well, that's a good question. I haven't, do you think that there is a difference between the political parties?
Yeah, there is, particularly on the cultural issues. We're not saying they're the same, but they're both status quo, and we got life or death issues that need real solutions, and we're not getting them. So, strategically, we're getting ballot lines so we can run local candidates. We've elected hundreds. We need to start electing thousands and build the Green Party up from the bottom up. When we get a caucus in Congress, it'll be hard to ignore us. And so that's a practical sort of strategic objective to running. And in most states, it's 1%, 2%, 3%, 5%. And it's a lot easier to run if you got a ballot line than if you run as an independent. You want to run for Congress in this country, In most states, it's thousands or tens of thousands of signatures compared to, say, the United Kingdom. You want to run as an independent for the House of Commons, you need 10 signatures. You want to run for Congress in India, the biggest electoral democracy in the world, you need 2 signatures. 2 signatures in New Zealand. And we're asking for thousands or tens of thousands. And then people ask us why we don't run more Greens down ballot. We try, but we get challenged with our petitions or we don't meet the number.
Well, if you get 40,000 votes in Wisconsin and Trump wins the state again by 20,000 votes, how will you feel about that?
I'll be mad at Biden. You know, they knocked us off the ballot in Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. Angela's from Milwaukee. She's a favorite daughter of Black Milwaukee. She got 67,000 votes running for sheriff. How do you think those people feel that the Democrats knocked us off the ballot? By basically violating the law. The facts and the law in the case said we should be on the ballot. We had 3 times the number of signatures we needed. Yeah,
but the question was, how would you feel if you swing a state like Michigan or Wisconsin or Florida, and your total is bigger than a Trump margin, which puts him back in the White House?
Our voters voted for us. They didn't vote for Trump. Our voters might not vote if we're not on the ballot. A lot of them won't, if according to that 2016. We're a different bucket of votes. Our votes are not there for the Democrats if we're not on the ballot. Most of our people will say, I've had it with both parties. When we go to fight on the issues, we're fighting the Democrats. Affordable housing, those are big city machines. Fracking, the Democrats are for fracking. We're the party that's opposed. And stopping fracking and new fossil fuel infrastructure is like the first thing we got to do to deal with this climate crisis. Or we're going to be burning fossil fuels for decades more.
I understand Angela wants to comment here.
I was just going to say, it's good to meet you. And at the end of the day, even if it does go for them, that's not on us. We told the Democrats years ago, if you want to run, you actually want to win, start running people that people are going to show up for. Start running candidates. I mean, it's not rocket science. Start running candidates that actually are responsive to, the issues people are asking for. People are asking overwhelmingly for Medicare for all. What is the Democrats' response to that? People are asking big time for a Green New Deal of some sort. They were even willing to settle for that watered down garbage that the Democrats were offering them. Nothing. So at the end of the day, if voters, if it goes for Trump, but, a wide margin of voters go for us, that's not our problem and it's not our fault. Democrats need to suck it up and run better candidates.
I see. Okay. Let me ask you a question. The Democratic Party, as we saw with Hillary Clinton in Michigan in 2016, when you try to get her votes counted, when you say her votes, they're not her votes. They were the votes of African Americans in Detroit, overwhelmingly. Why do you think, did you have any discussion? Did you ask the Democratic Party? Did anyone get any sense of why the Democrats weren't standing up for these voters in Detroit? And they didn't. Remember, I did that story in Florida back in 2000. Now, it's true that Nader's votes were far bigger than the margin. But on the other hand, the Republicans had removed 58,000 African Americans, accusing them of being felons. Their only crime was voting while black. And the Democratic Party didn't mention that in any of its battles to make Gore president. They ignored the black, the suppression of the black vote there. They ignored the suppression of the black vote in 2016 in Detroit and Michigan. Why do you think that is? Why do you think why did you take on that recount battle as a Green Party? And why didn't the Democrats? I mean, obviously you know why you did. I'd like to hear it. I'd like to hear your explanation, but I also want, your explanation if you heard from the Democrats, why they didn't join you in counting basically Hillary's votes.
Well, we want election integrity. So when we do have the majority of votes, we don't want somebody stealing the election from us. So we have an interest in that. It's just the right thing to do. I was going to ask you that question. Why did the Democrats roll over for the Republicans? I know about Florida. Angela was down there demonstrating to get the vote counted. And Gore Lieberman said, get off the streets, go home. We got this in the courts. And they got in the courts by the Supreme Court. And then in where you talk about 2016, 2004.
Yeah.
You had the big problems in Florida and New Mexico. So what I know is, I think it was from reading your stuff, or maybe Harvey Wasserman or Bob Fitzrockets, that Edwards wanted to keep fighting in Ohio, but Kerry said, if you don't get it resolved in 3 days, it was Bob Fitzrockets told us this. I don't want to fight it anymore. And I think my guess is they are more interested in the system looking legitimate than actually being legitimate, because they're part of the establishment. Now, I haven't talked to any of them or interviewed them, but that's my best guess.
It's very hard to talk to them. I have to say that in Michigan now, the Palace Investigative Fund, we did, with working with Black Voters Matter, post a list of voters who have been purged from the voter roll. So I'd like everyone listening to this, go to savemyvote2020.org, savemyvote2020.org, and you could see the list of 1/3 people purged from the voter rolls of Michigan. Our experts say half that list it's wrong. People have been accused of moving. They haven't. In Wisconsin, I will say that pushed by Mandela Barnes, the lieutenant governor, we did put up a list, but the Board of Elections there did say we're not going to purge these voters. We also have purge lists for North Carolina and Georgia. We would ask you to look your name up. If you are purged in Michigan, you have the right to register on Election Day. So bring your photo state ID, bring your proof of your current address, and re-register. And everyone should vote early if you can. Bring in that ID, bring in that proof of address, but first check at savemyvote2020.org. Now, I bring this up for two reasons. One, because I want everyone, green, red, blue, yellow, whatever, to vote and have their vote counted. And you shouldn't be purged from the voter rolls. But I should also note, and I'd like you to comment on this, the Attorney General of Michigan and the Secretary of State of Michigan told the Palace Investigative Fund not to put up the purge list, that we were discouraging people from voting. But of course, if you're purged from the voter rolls, that means you've had your registration canceled. You can't vote. You can't vote if you're not registered. So, what would be the position of the Green Party? Do you think that we should be informing people if they've been purged from the voter rolls?
Absolutely. I mean, you got to protect your vote and you got to watch it. And if there's a list of people that have been purged, people should have access to that just to see if they got purged.
And so why, again, I'd ask you to speculate. Well, that's your position. That seems fairly reasonable. Do you have any idea why the Democratic Party would be against issuing the purge list? Now, understand, I don't know if this plays into it, but overwhelmingly, it's a list of young people and voters of color, almost entirely a list of voters of color, which are removed, by the way, not by the Democrats now in control of state government, but by their Republican predecessors. They won't put them back and they don't want to talk about it. Do you have any idea why they wouldn't want to talk about it? I think that their view, and I'd like you to comment on this, is that by telling people that there's problems with voting, problems with keeping your registration, people are just going to give up and not vote. Do you accept their view, or do you have a different view?
I doubt that. I think they're kind of embarrassed and they don't want the public to know this has happened because they're responsible. So to me, it's, a cover your ass kind of thing. I don't think it would discourage people. I mean, they'd say, look, we made a mistake. Here's how to rectify it. Check out whether you're still registered. I mean, then it would look like the public officials are looking out for the people. Right now, it looks like they're just trying to cover their ass.
Well, of course, you have a lot of African American. Do you think that the Democratic Party, like in Michigan, which is basically the leadership is all white, is that they have a fear of a takeover of the party by African Americans?
I think in some localities. You want to comment on that, Angela?
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I can't speak with any authority on that. I don't, know those folks, but, it just seems to me when you're looking at where the Democrats actually show some backbone and some courage, the only time they do it is when they're bullying us. I mean, as far as like standing up for the people, you know, in 2000, I was one of those voters in Florida, and it was like very simple. Count our votes. We went to the governor's mansion, count our votes. Gore conceded, rolled over, like all of these thousands of people weren't in the street on his behalf. That gave me like the first glimpse of the fact that these people, they don't have any fight in them. It's like, if you truly believe in, you know, having a democracy or trying to have a democracy or standing up for the people, then you kind of need to do it. And they don't do it. And so what happened in Michigan is not surprising. And, you know, as far as thinking maybe they're fearing a takeover or a transfer of power to Black folks, it wouldn't surprise.
One final question. So what would you, as a Green Party, okay, you wake up and, hey, you're president and you're vice president. What would you do? And what can maybe the Green Party do, even if you're not elected, to expand and protect the right of voting to voters of color and young people?
Well, there are a number of things. One is get the pre-clearance provision of the Voting Rights Act restored so that people have a stronger, you know, legal tool to protect their vote. We would have a federal standard for ballot access for federal elections instead of 51 different jurisdictions with different rules and making it hard for people to get on the ballot. And there's a lot of things we like to see. I don't know whether federal has, you know, jurisdiction over them, like same-day voter registration, that voting equipment, any software involved should be public and not proprietary, where we can't see what's going on. We need, and this is probably something the federal government could, you know, enact, is a paper trail for all votes, so that, you know, that machine you were talking about, the human eyeball can check the, you know, the mechanical machines. I mean, I know you've written a lot about, you know, the billionaires and their outsized role in our elections. We're for public campaign financing, the We the People Amendment, which would end the Supreme Court initiated doctrines of money as speech rather than property, and corporations have natural rights like natural people, which makes them hard to regulate. And that would enable us to, you know, do real public campaign financing, full public campaign financing. So they're public functions, they should be publicly financed. So those are some of the reforms. I mentioned instant runoff voting, which should be extended to legislative bodies, multi-member districts. Jamie Raskin has a bill to do that for Congress. That's something I hope the Green Party will mobilize behind as we go forward. So all the parties get their fair share of representation and power. And you don't get, I mean, I've run district races where I got 48% of the vote, and my 48% of the people got no representation. And it's just not the way it should be. Most countries have proportional representation. It's a better form of democracy. So there's a whole agenda there, including, independent administration of elections.
No.
In our experience is partisan hacks. You know, they vote, if they're Republican, they want us on the ballot. If they're Democrat, they want us off. And whether you're talking about election boards, election commissions, or the courts, it's been strictly partisan, except for one renegade Republican joining Democrats to knock us off in Wisconsin. And we've been in the courts all over the country this election.
Well, thank you. You gave some very articulate answers and for some fairly tough questions. So thank you very much for your time. And for those, again, who missed that, who want to check if they've been purged from the voter rolls of Michigan, North Carolina, or Georgia, please go to either gregpalace.com or to SaveMyVote2020.org. SaveMyVote2020.org. I just want to remind people, as a public service, you can register on election day or when you go into vote in both Michigan and Wisconsin. So please check and see if you've been purged so that you have all the documentation with you so you don't lose your vote to the vote scammers. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for coming on. And I hope people check out your website, gregpalace.com.
Now, I don't endorse political parties or politicians, but I will say Ralph Nader, who you may have heard of, bought 500 copies of my book, How Trump Stole 2020, to pass around. So, okay, thank you very much for your time. Bye.
All right, thank you. So, yeah, before we wrap up, I really recommend people look at that website. You want to know what happened in Florida? You want to know what happened in Ohio 2004? What happened in 2016? What's happening now? He's got a whole archive of articles on there, and you can subscribe. You get a regular bulletin from him, and you begin to realize that we talk about democracy, but I mean, as he said, they used to do it in sheets, white sheets, the Ku Klux Klan. Now they do it with spreadsheets, and it's a big problem. So, yeah, check out his website. So, does the boss want us to answer more questions, or do you want to say something first, Angela? You just got on in the middle of the broadcast, so.
I'm exhausted. So,
Long day.
just, man, 13 hours. But, this was excellent information. And, I think that folks, I'm really concerned. I saw what happened in 2000 in Florida. And I also, the attempt to recall former Governor Scott Walker in Wisconsin, I want to say that was 2012. There were so many voter discrepancies to where it was ridiculous. And I remember being in Madison, with this huge group of people, and John Nichols from the Nation was actually out there, and they mentioned that the clerk of courts, or whoever her name, whatever function she was, clerk of elections, Kathy Nicholas, in Waukesha, Wisconsin, that the votes had not come in, and people in the crowd just started chanting, "The fix is in, the fix is in, the fix is in," and it was. So I want people to be very concerned. I want people to, be really observant, be really vigilant, because this is an unprecedented election, the circumstances around it. And there is a lot of chicanery afoot. And I'm saying that nice. I didn't even cuss. So I just, this was absolutely timely and necessary, because, this is we don't know how this is gonna run, and it's gonna get wild. So.
Well, excuse me, I don't see any questions coming up on the screen, so I guess it's time for last words. What I think I'll do is reiterate some points I made at the beginning. We're still trying to reach our goal of 7 million voter contacts through phone banking and text banking. And you can go to our website, howieawkins.us, and volunteer. And we also need donations, because we're paying people to work on this, more than just a few hours volunteer, but, on a regular basis to make those voter contacts. And then we're starting to collect money so we can intervene. We have standing. And if there's monkey business, I mean, we already see what Trump's trying to do. We got this Supreme Court decision. Trump's already shown his hand. They're saying don't count the mail-in ballots. And he may come out on election day and say they're all fraudulent. Stop the election count right now. A repeat of Florida on a bigger scale. He's even said, or Republicans have said, and the Constitution would permit this, that even if Biden wins the state, they're going to send Trump electors to the Electoral College, because they got a majority of Republicans in the state legislature. So there's a lot of stuff we got to watch out for. So we've started to collect money so we can intervene legally. And you go to hawkins20.us/ oh, there it is on the screen. And so we're starting to gather resources, because more than likely we'll be in those fights. And then we got to be prepared to go out on the streets. Rochester Labor Council, up near where I live at, was the first to call on the AFL-CIO to prepare for a general strike if they try to stop the vote count. And the Seattle Labor Council and the San Francisco Labor Council picked up on that. Sarah Nelson from the flight attendants, who's got a lot of pull, She really got that deal for the airline industry through in the first CARES Act. And even Trump has talked to these local labor council. So we got to push for that because, that's where our real power is if it comes to this. And we got to be out in the streets like Angela was in 2000. And if Democrats say get off the street, this time we say no. We're going to make sure the vote is counted. Because you know what they did in Florida? The Republicans stayed on the street. And they had, right-wing zealots, and they called it the Brook Brothers riots. These guys who were congressional aides for Republican members of Congress came down there, and they actually broke into some voting places where they're counting the ballot, turned over tables, scattered stuff all around, intimidated people. We can't let them do it this time, particularly with Trump egging on these ragtag white vigilante groups that call themselves militias, which aren't even legal. You can't have private armies in this country. It's illegal in every state, which begs the question, why aren't the Democratic district attorneys and attorney generals telling these people they got to disband? So we can't rely on the Democrats to do this alone. They do have an army of lawyers ready to go to court. That's good. They got the money to do that, but we got to be out on the streets too. And then the last point is next Tuesday, we're going to have an extended live stream because that's election day, and we're going to get reports from Green candidates all over the country. We're going to talk about where we're going after the election. We'll talk about election protection, and we'll be the place to be. Forget about MSNBC or Democracy Now!, which hasn't covered us. You want to find out what's going on with the Green Party and the real left in this country, it'll be on that live stream next Tuesday. And the details of that will be posted on our social media soon. We're going to work them out in the next couple of days, and then you'll know when it starts. And we'll have an interesting election day, if nothing else. And so we look forward to seeing y'all then. And I hope everybody has a good night.